Amensol Shadow. Collision. The second tale of the unseen pillar of the House of Amensol. It's right there. I can feel it. If it were right in front of me, my fingertips would slip right off its surface. Hanai thought to himself. Why is everything so hazy? Why can't I remember? I hate this cursed place. Hanai often felt there was a piece of himself missing, especially when he was around Avendir, the king's overachieving son. He hated the time they were together, and he hated himself even more for feeling that way. After all, Avendir was the closest thing to family he had. Hanai's only known relative had been his grandfather, who passed away shortly after their arrival in Terminus. It wasn't so much an arrival as an upheaval. For reasons unknown, a large number of the human race had been brought to Terminus, along with a piece of their heritage, the land of Vastemith. What happened to Vastemith or the rest of the human race, and why they were chosen to depart their world and crash into the world of Terminus, was an unsolved puzzle, so perplexing that most had given up trying to figure it out. And they were not the only race to which this had happened. The first winter of their arrival was catastrophic in more ways than one. Many had died. If it had not been for the help of the elven people of Fairthale, many more would have joined them. The human leader after the collision was Amensol. He had led the human race through the dark time and brokered aid from the elves. They gave of their abundance, and in return gained a stalwart ally in the humans. That same year, after the thaw, Amensol laid the foundations of the city of Havensong, and of his throne of power. He was king. The longboat swayed in the current. At sea was usually the only place Hanai could find solace from his tortured mind, but with nowhere to refuge from the face of Avendir, this long voyage had been a lesson in suffering. It's right on the tip of my tongue. Why can't I remember? Amensol had been the last to see his grandfather alive. He had been rescued as a young boy of around 4 years, nobody knew for sure, by Amensol in a forest during the cursed frost, their tragic first winter. Many of the families were flung some distance from each other, and these wayward sky travelers sought out their own and a way to survive. Hanai's grandfather and he had been found hiding in a felled forest by men. There was an accident while Amensol was attempting to rescue the old man after saving Hanai, but he was tragically lost in a fire that consumed the entire area in the middle of a snowy winter. Such an outlandish tale would have been enough to cry false in any instance, but in the ignorance of the ways of Terminus and after the fate that had just befallen the world of men, it didn't seem as plausible. In the wake of these events, with nobody knowing the young boy, and the young boy not knowing much of himself, Amensol took it upon himself to ensure the boy was cared for. An elven couple with no offspring of their own brought him into their home during that winter. Rue and Olanaya cared well for him and allowed him to learn under elvish schoolmasters. They had named him, since he did not speak his name from the death of his grandfather. He did not know it. Hanai, meaning sorrow, was given to the boy who had lost so much and carried that weight every step he took. You see it yet? Amensol asked, to look out at the bow of the boat. The fog was making it difficult to maneuver. An elven diviner had not graced this trip, so they used the best tool the humans had brought with them for such a journey: common sense. Should be close, Lord. Within the hour by my map, the sailor answered back. Humans were born out of water, and though they had no gills or fins of scales, it was always their home. They were no doubt a seafaring people. Hon, I'm dying here. Avendir looked over at Hanai, unable to keep himself still. If you ask me one more time if we're there yet, I will throw you overboard, Hanai huffed. Hanai was Avendir's favorite person in the world, and whenever he had occasion to see him, he never left his side. So, do you think there will be any young Ginto ladies there? Father may have to marry me off to one of them, for treaty or something. Avendir continued unceasingly. I look older than I am, right? You weren't much older than 16 when you married, and I'm like 16 and a half. We could at least be betrothed. Hanai allowed the question, not just out of a duty to his rescuer and somewhat adopted family, but he was also grateful for the distraction. He shot back. You don't even know what the Ginto look like. They could have 2 heads, look like boars, breathe toxic gas from their nostrils, or their skin could be on fire. We also don't have any accords with the Dwarven nation. Perhaps your father can arrange for you to be married to the handsomest bearded female in Kadasa. Furthermore, and I continued, I was 19 when I was married. I remember it because it was 2 years ago. And lastly, you look about 3 days weaned. The fuzz on your chin isn't even noticeable due to the glaring pimple marks on your face.
Not fitting. This is not fitting. You will stay here.
Hanai grabbed his head. A throb of pain gripped him as his grandfather's words seemed to pierce his ears. He didn't remember this conversation. Why was it flashing in his mind?
Who is he talking to? Me? I was too young. I wouldn't be going anywhere. Who's that girl crying?
I do not appreciate that. I'll have you know, it's short because I have started shaving. Abadir continued, oblivious to Hanai's condition. I shave all the time now, early in the morning, after my swordsmanship lessons. Do you notice how big my arms are getting? They're at least twice the size of Cassio's. Ugh, he's so dumb.
What is this house? I do not know this house. Is that a horse in the house?
Land, 40 cubits starboard. Bring her around, mate. The lookout peered into the bright haze. Finally, King Amensol sighed. His weary look turned light and confident once more. This was a meeting he had waited for ever since learning that the Ginto's fallen god Itaro had begun raising an army against his own people. His one goal was world domination, and his powers and troop size were concerned to all. Men, gather your things. Let's see what destiny has waiting for us, eh? And I snapped out of it long enough to hear the order. He reached over for a sword and bedroll. He braced himself on the railing of the ship's side, and another searing pain in his head sent him back down to the deck with a moan.
It is not fitting, and you will stay here. He has married ignorant girl. I love him and he loves me. He told me. Don't care what you say. Horse. Wooden horse. My horse. The horse in that house was my horse. Home? This is home.
Hanai was crumpled to his knees, the headache debilitating. He knew the place in the flashes he was getting. It was his home, but it was no home he had known on Terminus. This was somewhere else.
Vastemeth. This is my home. Don't care what you say. You are a fool. He doesn't love you. He abandoned you and the boy. Left you for me to care for and to bear the shame for his actions. Home. Mom. That's my mom. My mom.
Hon, hey, are you okay? Evandir leaned over and grabbed Hanai's shoulders, and I was unaware of anything taking place around him. He stared there, crouched over with his forearms and face on the deck, rocking and moaning. A sailor quipped at him while gathering up his things. Bah, told you not to eat that jerky, mate. Don't even know what kind of animal that was. Gotta love Terminus.
Mom. Why are she and Grandfather arguing? Who is abandoning us? Don't care what you say! Mom, where are you going? Don't pack our things. I don't want to leave Grandfather's. Bear the shame for his actions. Can't lose you. My daughter like a prostitute.
The long boat jerked slightly forward. The sand made a crunching sound through the timbers on the bottom of the vessel. Most of the men and elves who were part of that summit meeting on the island of Vesu were busy caring for their own items, not noticing the young man kneeled over at the back of the boat. Elven emissaries and members of King Amensol's council had brought gifts to exchange with their counterparts coming to the island, as was their custom. This was the most important meeting in the human nation of Terminus. Havensong had risen to enough prestige to be counted as a leader in the long-standing land of the elves. The elves had been transplanted in Terminus through a collision of their own, but had been settled for hundreds of years and ruled their lands well. The addition of another race of powerful beings did give cause for concern for the balance of power on their continent. After all, not all races in Terminus saw eye to eye. Fortunately, The humans' early reliance on the elves had both indebted them to the elves, and it also allowed the humans to thrive and add yet another powerful ally to the elves' aim for peace and prosperity in their new homeland. "Hey, was it that jerky?" Evander whispered to his big adopted brother.
Mom, I don't want to leave grandfather's. Where are we going? Who is this man? And I thought deeply. His back, woolen cloak, a market. His back is to me. This has to be him. Mom joins him in the alley, out of sight. Mom is sad. I can't hear what they're saying. He left down the alley. Mom is crying. Can't see his face. Like a prostitute. This is not fitting. This is not fitting. You will stay here. He has married ignorant girl. This conversation is twisted. I can't get it straight. You ignorant girl. There's a married man.
Another sharp pain raced through Hanai's head. This time he could not hold back a yell. Avendur noticed this was something beyond rotgut. He whispered to Hanai to stay put while he got help. Amensol was already off the boat, his mind consumed with the meeting, the proper first introduction to the Ginto remnants, those who had not left to follow their own demigod, High Mortal Itero. He was surrounded by the elven leadership. Avendur pushed his way through to his father, the king.
Mom, I don't want to leave. This is my home. What is this man's name, this man who abandoned you? His name is right here. What is it? I have to know. He is a married man. Shames me. Shames me.
Hanai's pain was deep. He wasn't even sure if it was coming from his head or coming from his mind. He felt his heart broken, his life ripped from him, fear, apprehension, anxiety, loss.
Loss. Mom, I want to stay.
All at once, and with no precursor, Hanai's pain subsided. His mind returned to where he was. The faint sounds of chattering men and clanging metal faded back into his ears. He paused for a moment, as if waking from a surreal dream. He raised his back and sat up on his knees, looking around and regaining his awareness. He heard someone yelling his name. It sounded like Avendur. "Do come back to look for him, father, please," Avendur begged. He pulled at the king's arm until Amensol acquiesced with a scowl. This distraction had better be merited, Amensol thought. Avendur spun his father around and pulled him all the way back through the maze of people getting off the boat. Amensol looked over the last few of his soldiers to see Hanai kneeling by his gear on the boat, looking around as if scouting out the coastline. Avendur finally caught a glimpse of Hanai, who appeared to be doing much better. He turned his eyes slowly back to his father, foreseeing the inevitable look that would be awaiting him. He was not disappointed. "Father, I promise, I thought he was dying," Avendur pleaded. Amensol cast a look of fatherly disappointment, turned, and headed back to the waiting council members and emissaries. Avendur raced back over to Hanai. "Are you okay? Was it the jerky? I thought you were dying or something," Avendur said, barely stopping to breathe as he rambled on about all the things that he thought could be wrong with Hanai. Hanai interrupted him. "Hey, just give me a second. Go catch up to the group. I'll be there soon to continue my duties as babysitter. Go on." He dismissed Avendur. Reluctantly, Avendur got off the boat once more and began sulking his way back to the group who had headed into the forest. Hanai took several deep breaths, clearing his head and his body from that episode. His mind didn't want to even think about all the memories that had flooded back to him. He was blocking them out, too difficult to even discern right now. His mind returned to his duty: pack, march, protect. Ever since Hanai was old enough to swing a sword, he swung it well. After he spent a few winters with the elves and his caretakers, he began living full-time with his own people. Previously, his summers had been spent in the household of Amensol, learning from the king, sitting at his table. Of course, They were new here, and being king of vagabonds was not a title that lent itself to lavish trappings. Summers were hard work, building stables, barns, dwellings, cultivating and harvesting, and his personal favorite, battle training. And so always kept him close by, one eye on the business at hand and one eye seemingly on Hanai. Hanai had always believed that he felt guilty for not being able to save his grandfather, so he made it his mission to protect the boy, as he had promised his grandfather just before he died. Amensol also had a keen interest in Hanai, asking him often in his youth about his family, about his home, what he remembered about his grandfather. The toll of the collision on those who bore it left many unanswered questions, not just about how it happened, but about their previous lives on Vastamith. There were plenty of people with pretty good memories of their former lives, but it was common to have holes in those memories. Many family members were forgotten. What was your profession? What did the grass smell like? What was your favorite meal? What type of animals were dangerous to humans there? And for someone as young as Hanai, memories were especially spotty. He had years ago written off remembering anything of his life back home. But Amensol had tried to help him. He prodded him with questions, hoping to light the way to some new lost memory. He had often tried to get him to remember his given name, or his mother, or his father's name. He didn't even know his grandfather's name. To a 4-year-old boy, his name is grandfather. Hanai was 5 when Avondale was born, and early on, Hanai was the big brother and protector of little Avondale. He would be told that this little child would one day be the king, and that he would be the one to look out for and protect him. And what an important job that is for anyone to have. It was probably the best job in the entire world. Once Hanai reached his teenage years, all his emotions about his family, his grandfather, his current lot, watching over a little kid who would be greater than him, even though he had to teach him everything and take care of him and make sure he didn't do something stupid, ate at him, and all the sorrows from his early childhood were reawakened. He wanted nothing more than to have any other job in the world than the guardian of the king's son. Every time Hanai looked at Avondale, it reminded him that Avondale had everything and Hanai had lost everything, and there was nothing he could do about it. He wasn't sure why, but seeking the approval of Amensol above his own son was always an unattainable goal, and he knew it. He found some peace in the arms of a girl, the daughter of a husbandryman. She rode fiercely and with reckless speed, and her sense of adventure compelled Hanai. She was his age, and as soon as they were of marrying age, he wasted no time in trying to fill the familiar hole he felt so sharply. Just before leaving on his journey, she had told him she was with child, and that news, while exciting, ate at Hanai and brought back a wave of emotions of his own childhood, his jealousy of Avondale's lot in life, and his own lack of heritage. He had struggled mightily to remember a shred of anything. Now that he had, he wanted it to go away. Hanai brought up the rear of the party, heading to the established meeting place on the Isle of Vesu. This would be many days, waiting for all parties to arrive. All 6 of the transplanted races and the native inhabitants of Terminus were meeting with the remnants of the Gento people to discuss how to best handle the new threat to their existence. Hanai welcomed an excuse to fight. His skills were impressive, on their way to being comparable to Amensol himself, probably one of the greatest warriors of the human race. It wasn't his technique, it was his confidence in every motion, every pivot, every swing of his blade. There were no second guesses. His first guess was always right. The forest on Vesu was quiet. Wildlife was rare, which was strange looking around the ground and seeing no tracks from animals to speak of. The land looked basically untouched, except for the trail they were currently on. The surroundings were quiet, broken only by the clang of a sword or the mumble of a low conversation. A muffled voice was speaking just ahead. It came louder and clearer. They were yelling Amensol's name. Hanai raced into the pack, searching out the king and his son. As he drew closer, he heard someone once again holler the king's name. Amensol! The pain was back. Not now, Hanai thought to himself. He almost was thrown to the ground by the shock. He recovered and staggered forward. Amensol! This time, the memory hit him like a stone, and he lost his balance and fell with his face in the dirt. Amensol is a married man. Wait.
Am I projecting? This is just my memories being corrupted by my feelings. Right? Mom, I don't want you to leave. Baby, I'll be right back. You will stay here. Abandon you and the boy. Stay here. Baby, I'll be right back. The boy, stay here.
Hanai couldn't move. Tears welled in his eyes as they lay facing the moist ground. His hand stretched out for his mother, for the child being left, for the past that was stolen. "No," he whispered. "I don't want to leave." His memory came back in quick flashes. He saw his mom leave, crying, his grandfather yelling, his grandfather crying. He was consoled. His mother was coming right back. She just had to meet someone in the village. But the villagers didn't talk to them. He played only with his mother and his grandfather. And then it happened. An ear-splitting noise, flashes of blinding light, roars of unending thunder, and nothing. He remembered his grandfather and the cold. It was so cold. He had carried the boy through the snow for days, yelling his mother's name. He found something in the snow under a tree. He had cried. He had cried for days. He didn't yell his mother's name anymore. And then they were found. He lost his grandfather. One last night sleeping in his grandfather's lap.
Baby, I'll be right back. No, you won't. I'll never see you again. I'll never see home again. I'll never see grandfather again. Amensol. Amensol is my father. I have a father. I hate Amensol. But I crave the love of Amensol. I hate and love my father. Life is bitter, mother. I will not leave my son as you left me. I will protect him. I love you, Mom. I didn't want to go.
Hanai heard rustling, shouting. His thoughts returned for a brief second. Someone was shouting Amensol's name, the king's name, his father's name. He jumped to his feet and sprinted into the gaggle of politicians. They were all yelling and vying for the safest location in the pack. "Amensol!" Hanai shouted. He ran, glancing quickly in his periphery for the king. He spotted Avendir, separated from the group, looking dazed. Hanai grabbed his neck. He felt the soft tuft of feather. The sensation was strange. He needed to run. He didn't know why. Away. So he did. Avendir took off sluggishly, deeper into the forest off the trail, yanking the dot from his skin. The king's men were shouting and surrounding. A couple broke off and sped after Avendir. Hanai took off in their direction. It was then he heard the first rustling in the trees. He heard a crash in the direction of the two soldiers chasing Avendir. He only saw one. He scanned as he continued to chase. Another man was shouting. "Revenant!" they cried. Revenant was the name for the fallen Ginto pursuing their new Dark Lord, the enemy of the peoples of Terminus. Revenant are here, thought Hanai. He heard another crash, and this time spotted the cause. A body had dropped from a tree onto the remaining soldiers. There was what appeared to be a sword sticking from the squirming body of a soldier. This was not good. Hanai began scanning treetops as he ran. "Avendir!" he yelled out. Avendir pressed on. Not 5 steps later, Avendir tripped and landed with a hard thud on the forest floor. Hanai finally caught up. He rolled Avendir over and noticed his pupils dilated. He was mumbling something about running away. There was a dot in his neck, and I pulled it out and sniffed the tip. There was a sweet and flowery scent that was unrecognizable to him. It was definitely some type of hallucinogen. "Hang on, little brother, I've got you." And I scooped him off the ground. He needed to get him back to the group, fast. It appeared like the king's men were headed his way slowly and methodically, no doubt clearing and protecting the king as they all moved safely to his location. There was no way to know how many Revenant were on the island. Obviously, This was an attempt to squelch the meeting before it began. Taking out some of the heads of state would go a great way in taking the fighting spirit out of your enemy. And I shouldered Avendir's limp body and set off in as fast of a stride as he could muster. Something bit him. He swatted his neck. A dart. Quickly he pulled it out, the same as the other. His head went fuzzy, his vision very slowly blurred. Keep it together, Hon. His pace slowed, but he pressed on as quickly as he could. There was a rustle in a tree above him. As fast as he could draw his sword, with the free arm not holding Avendir, the revenant soldier was upon him. His sword came free from its sheath just in time to parry the first swing. He knew he could not fight while carrying a man on one shoulder. He kicked leaves and dirt onto the face of the enemy, and placed Avendir's body on the ground with a thud. Sorry, he thought. There was no time to do that nicely. The revenant soldier swung with a roar. A high overhead crossing swing. Hanai quickly dodged just under the blade's arc and brought the pommel of his sword directly into the rib cage of his enemy with a crack. He knew he had broken ribs. He paced up to his enemy to look him in the eyes as he thrust his blade into the wounded soldier. It pierced with a sickening gurgle. The enemy fell to the ground. And I didn't hear this one in time, and a second revenant soldier landed to his rear and kicked him in the small of his back. His balance was thrown off by the dying body at his feet, and he fell to the ground and quickly rolled to get eyes on his enemy. The revenant jumped at him with all fours. It had large talons on both hands and swiped quickly at him, and I pushed the incoming hands to the side as the body fell beside him. He maneuvered for position and won, mounting the downed revenant. He quickly pulled a long dagger from his side and shoved it through the heart of his pinned foe. The revenant let out a screech. Then it looked at him as he was expiring. You will die by our hands, the revenant gasped. But not today, and I replied with a stern face. The revenant laughed, coughing and sucking for one last breath. You... And then he was dead. And I dismounted the enemy and reached over to grab Avendir once more. The king's patrol was fast approaching now. As he reached, the pain traveled through his arm. He had a scratch on his upper arm. Most likely from the claws, he thought. He noticed it foaming in the open wound. He was feeling lightheaded again. All of a sudden, he lost his strength and slowly slid over to one side, right next to Avendir. Hon? Is that you? I don't feel so well. Avendir sputtered. The agent was already beginning to wear off. And I tried to speak, but he felt his muscles relaxing all over his body. It was hard to take a breath. The king ran through his guards and fell to his knees beside his son. He looked him over and spoke with him to make sure he was going to recover. Then he turned to check on Hanai, the savior of Avendir. Hey, you protected my boy. I'm so very proud of you, Amensol said, noticing the mortal wound festering on Hanai's arm. The boy, stay here, Hanai said under his breath, the poison already affecting his mind. Stay here. I don't want to leave. I know, Amensol said, as a tear began its way down his weathered face. I'll stay here with you. I'm not leaving. And I mustered just enough strength to tug the king's coat toward him. He whispered into the king's ear, I know you. I know. And I whispered, I am your boy. I know. And Hanai closed his eyes, thinking of his mother.